At 71, my testosterone was so low I couldn't get hard. Then I did this, and both problems vanished. My name is Walter. I'm 71 years old. I live on a piece of land outside Abilene, Kansas, that my father worked before me, and his father before that. Last spring, I had a testosterone reading that my doctor said was consistent with a man in his late 80s. That same week, I carried a 200-pound calf out of a ditch by myself, drove a fence post for an hour in the afternoon heat, and that night, when my wife came to bed, I was there for her in a way I hadn't been in 4 years. My doctor stared at those numbers and then stared at me. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then he said, "Well, that doesn't add up." I told him it added up just fine once you understood what was actually going on. If you're watching this, I think you already know something has been off. You've noticed it. Maybe in the morning, maybe in the way your body doesn't respond the way it used to, maybe in how you've started sleeping on your side of the bed and staying there. You don't need me to tell you what it feels like. I lived it for longer than I care to admit. And if you stay until the end of this, I'm going to tell you what changed. Not with a prescription, not with a procedure, but with a few things a stubborn old farmer figured out the hard way. That part comes later. Stay with me. The first time I noticed it was a Tuesday morning in March, 3 years ago. I know it was Tuesday because I'd just gotten back from dropping my wife at her sister's in Salina, a 3-hour round trip. When I came home, the house was quiet. I walked upstairs and I stood in front of the mirror, and I remember thinking, who is this? Not dramatically, just quietly. The face was mine, but something behind it was different. It hadn't happened all at once. These things never do. But that morning was the first time I stopped pretending I hadn't noticed. I'd been noticing for about a year at that point. First, it was the energy, that flat, low ceiling feeling where you do the work, but you're not really in it. Then it was sleep, which stopped being restful and started being something I just survived. And then it was the bedroom, which I will talk about plainly because I think enough men have danced around it for long enough. My body stopped cooperating. Not every time, not all at once, but often enough that I started managing around it, coming to bed late so she'd be asleep, turning away when she reached for me, telling myself it was the work, it was the season, it was just a phase. Phases don't last 14 months. I knew that, but knowing something and saying it out loud are two different animals. My wife, Patricia, never said a word. That almost made it worse. She was kind about it, patient in the way that a woman who has been married for 43 years learns to be, and her patience made me feel smaller than any unkind word could have. I wasn't meeting her, and every morning I woke up next to her, I felt the gap between who I'd been and who I was becoming. I went to see my doctor, a man named Dr. Ellerman, who I've been going to for years, and I told him what was happening. I sat in that little room with the paper on the table, and I said it plainly, because I'm too old for anything else. He listened, nodded, ordered blood work, and 2 weeks later told me my testosterone was low, and handed me a pamphlet. A pamphlet. He said the levels weren't dangerously low, just age consistent, that my body was doing what bodies do, that there were options, gel, injections, a patch, and that some men found them helpful, though results varied. He said it in the tone of someone reading from a manual. Results vary. I thanked him and drove home. I sat in my truck in the driveway for about 20 minutes. I wasn't angry at Dr. Ellerman. He's not a bad man. He was doing what he was trained to do, which is manage decline. That's what the whole system is oriented around. Managing the fact that you're getting older, making it quieter, making it more comfortable, not reversing anything, not asking whether anything could be different, just managing. And I had spent a year being managed, and it wasn't working. The injections he mentioned, I looked them up. Side effects that included things I didn't want. Dependency, because your body stops trying to produce what it's getting from outside. A maintenance schedule, like a piece of machinery. I am not a piece of machinery. I'm a man who has worked this land for 40 years, and I was not going to outsource the rest of my life to a needle in a clinic. So I drove back out to the field, and I thought about it the way I think about everything, from the ground up. What changes is usually one thing happening quietly for a long time before the damage is visible. A fence post that's been rotting at the base for 2 seasons before it falls. An engine burning oil for months before it locks up. Something in my body had been shifting for years before I noticed the morning in the mirror. The question was what, and whether it was still reversible. The answer came from a man named Hector. Hector is my neighbor to the east. He's 76, and I'll be honest with you, he looks like a man in his early 60s. Square shoulders, clear eyes. He moves around his property in a way that men my age don't, with a kind of ease that I'd noticed but had written off as genetics or luck. He's been married to the same woman for 50 years. He has a laugh you can hear from 2 properties over. I ran into him at the grain elevator one afternoon in late April. We were waiting on a truck, and we started talking, the way you do when you've got nowhere to be for 40 minutes. I don't remember exactly how it came up. I think I said something offhand about getting old, one of those things men say to fill space. And Hector stopped and looked at me. He said, "You sleeping all right, Walter?" I said I wasn't, not really. He said, "You still working like you used to?" I said, "Less than I'd like." And he looked at me for a moment, and then said something I've thought about since. He said, "The problem isn't your age. The problem is your testosterone is probably doing something your doctor didn't explain to you." He wasn't a doctor. He didn't talk like one. He just said it the way you'd say the weather was turning. Plain, matter of fact, like it was just information. He said that a few years back he'd gone through something similar, and that it wasn't until he understood what was actually happening inside, not the number on the test, but the mechanism, that anything changed. He said he'd share what he'd learned if I wanted to hear it. I wanted to hear it. Here's the first thing Hector explained to me, and once I understood it, I couldn't unsee it. Your body, he told me, has 2 kinds of testosterone. There's the amount you produce, which is the number on the blood test, and then there's the amount that's actually free, meaning available to do anything, which is usually a much smaller fraction. The rest is bound up, locked to proteins in your blood, doing nothing. When the doctor says your levels are age consistent and hands you a pamphlet, he's usually only talking about the total number, not how much of it is actually getting through. But here's the part that really got me. And I want to explain this the way Hector explained it to me because he didn't use a single word I needed to look up. He said, "Imagine you have $100 in your wallet. That's your total testosterone. But 50 of those bills are soaking wet, stuck together, useless. And another 30 have been converted, quietly, without you knowing, into something else entirely, a different hormone, one your body wasn't designed to run on in those amounts. So out of your $100, you might only actually be able to spend 15 or 20, and you've been wondering why you feel broke." That conversion he was talking about, testosterone turning into estrogen, is something that happens more aggressively in men over 50, especially men who carry any extra weight around the middle. It's silent. There's no alarm. Your body doesn't tell you it's happening. It just happens. And you wonder why the energy is gone and the body isn't responding, and the man in the mirror looks tired. And then Hector told me the first practical thing: zinc. Not supplements, not powder, just food. Specifically, oysters, which I'd never eaten much of, and pumpkin seeds, which I had eaten since I was a kid because my mother used to roast them every fall. What I didn't know was that zinc is one of the key minerals involved in blocking that conversion, testosterone into estrogen. The enzyme responsible for that conversion needs zinc to function. Feed the body enough zinc, and the conversion slows down. More of what you produce stays as what it's supposed to be. Hector told me he'd started eating a small handful of pumpkin seeds every morning with his coffee, about an ounce, roasted without salt, and had kept it up for 2 years. He said within a couple of months, he'd noticed his energy was more consistent. Not spiked, not artificial, just steadier. And that other things followed from that. I want to pause here for a moment because if what I'm saying is making sense to you, if you've been in a doctor's office and been handed a pamphlet and driven home with that hollow feeling, I want you to know there are men out there who found a different path, men who weren't willing to be managed. If this channel is useful to you, if you think it might matter to another man you know, hit the subscribe button and leave a like. I don't run ads, I don't have a program to sell. I'm just a 71-year-old farmer talking into a camera because I spent too long keeping this to myself, and I don't think that served anybody. Now, the second thing I want to tell you, and I'll say this carefully because it took me a long time to get here. For years, I was convinced that if something came in a bottle, it wasn't serious. That was my position. I'd watched too many late night commercials and seen too many things promised and never delivered, and I had decided firmly that no capsule was going to do what 40 years of modern medicine had failed to do. That wasn't stubbornness for its own sake, it was just the conclusion a man reaches when he's been let down enough times. What changed was a conversation with Hector about 6 weeks into all of this. I'd been doing the zinc, I'd made some other adjustments I'll tell you about, and things were moving. Slowly, but noticeably. And Hector, who doesn't waste words, said to me, Walter, there's one more thing I should mention. I was stubborn about it too. He told me that a friend of his, a man he'd known since the service, had told him about a combination he'd been using. Natural ingredients, nothing pharmaceutical. Hector had resisted for about a year. Then he tried it, and what he described wasn't enthusiasm. He wasn't selling me anything. He said, I don't know how to explain it, except that things kept improving after I added it, and I don't think that was a coincidence. So I looked into it, and what I found, and what I've been using for going on 14 months now, is something that addresses directly what I'd been explaining to myself about the mechanism. There are two things in it that I want to mention by name because they're the ones I noticed. The first is fenugreek. I'd never heard of it before Hector mentioned it. It's a seed, used in cooking in some parts of the world. But what caught my attention was what it apparently does to that conversion problem I described. It blocks the process that quietly turns your testosterone into something else. I don't know the chemistry of it. What I know is that within about 3 to 4 weeks of adding it, the mornings started feeling different. Not dramatically, but there was something there that I'd stopped expecting to find. The second is tribulus. It's a plant that's been used for a long time in parts of the world where men don't go quietly into this kind of decline. What it appears to do, from what I've read, and more importantly from what I've felt, is signal the body to keep producing, like reminding a factory that it hasn't been shut down. I hadn't expected much. What I got was a gradual return to something I'd written off. I want to be clear about what I'm saying and what I'm not saying. I'm not saying this fixed everything overnight. I'm not saying it will do the same for you. I don't know your body and I'm not a doctor. What I'm saying is that after about a month, I noticed things were moving in a direction they hadn't moved in years. The energy came back at a different quality, not the flat ceiling I'd been living under. And the bedroom became a place I wanted to be again, not a reminder of something I'd lost. Patricia noticed before I said anything. That's how I knew. If you want to look at what I'm using, the link is in the description. I'm not telling you to buy anything. I'm telling you it's there if you want to check it out for yourself. Now, the third thing, and this one surprised me more than anything Hector told me, sunlight. Not tanning, not lounging, specifically morning sunlight on skin, arms, neck, face, for at least 15 to 20 minutes within the first hour of waking. Not through a window, outside, even in winter when I'd take my coffee to the porch and stand there in the cold, feeling slightly ridiculous. What Hector explained to me, and what I later found confirmed in research out of a university I won't pretend to remember the name of, is that cholesterol in the skin, the same thing doctors tell you to worry about, is part of the raw material your body uses to manufacture testosterone. Ultraviolet light hits the skin and triggers a conversion. Your body essentially uses sunlight to start the production process. He described it like this: your body is a factory, and morning light is the power switch. If you turn the switch on at noon instead of 7 in the morning, the factory runs fewer hours. I had spent years waking before dawn and then staying indoors, eating inside, working in the barn, only going out when the day was already half over. I had, without knowing it, been cutting off one of my body's primary inputs. I changed that immediately. 20 minutes on the porch every morning, coffee in hand, whatever the weather. Within 2 weeks, I was sleeping better. Within a month, the flat ceiling feeling had lifted noticeably. I don't know what percentage of what changed was this alone. Things were changing together, the way they usually do, but I'm convinced it mattered. The fourth thing was one I came to more slowly, because it required me to look at something I'd been avoiding. I'd been carrying anger for a long time. Not the loud kind. I'm not a loud man. The quiet kind. The kind that sits in the chest and never quite gets named. Some of it was about my health. Some of it was about the years I'd felt less than what I'd been. Some of it went further back than that, to things between my father and me that I'd never said out loud and never planned to. The reason I mention this here, in an episode about testosterone and physiology, is that Hector said something that stayed with me. He said that his own doctor, the one who actually helped him, had told him that chronic, unexpressed anger keeps cortisol elevated. And elevated cortisol, that's the stress hormone, the body's alarm system, directly suppresses testosterone production. It's not poetic, it's not psychological, it's biological. The alarm going off all day tells the body to stay in emergency mode. And emergency mode is not a state in which the body prioritizes making you feel like a man. Emergency mode is survival mode. And you can eat all the pumpkin seeds you want and stand in the sun every morning. But if the alarm is running underneath everything else, you're working against yourself. So I made a specific decision. I drove out to the east fence line one evening, a spot I've been going to since I was a boy, where the land is quiet in a particular way. And I sat there and I did something I hadn't done in decades. I said out loud, to no one, what I'd been carrying. Not everything, but enough. And then I let myself think about what I still wanted. Not what I'd lost, not what I should have done, but what was still possible from here. That sounds simple. It wasn't. But it was one of the more consequential hours of the last 10 years of my life. The practical instruction I'd give anyone watching this is not complicated. Find a quiet place. Doesn't have to be a fence line in Kansas. And ask yourself one honest question. What am I still angry about that I've never said out loud? You don't have to say it to another person. Say it to a field. Say it to your truck. The body doesn't care who's listening. It just needs the valve to open. Cortisol doesn't distinguish between unexpressed anger from 40 years ago and a threat standing in front of you today. It just measures pressure. And pressure, held long enough, costs you more than you know. I'm Walter. I'm 71 years old. I farm a piece of land outside Abilene, Kansas that has been in my family for 3 generations. My testosterone, according to a blood test last spring, reads like a man in his late 80s, and I am doing things with my body and with my wife that I had told myself were behind me. The central thing I want you to take from this is simple. The problem usually isn't that your body has stopped working. The problem is that somewhere along the way, through food, through light, through stress, through silence, you cut off some of the inputs. And the body, given the right materials, still knows what to do. Tell me in the comments, what was the first moment you noticed something had changed? And did you say anything to anyone? Or did you keep it to yourself? There's something I want to say directly before I go. The body has a window. I don't mean that as a scare tactic. I mean it as something I learned by almost missing mine. Tissue that hasn't been used in a certain way for long enough starts to adapt to not being used. Relationships that have been quiet for years develop their own kind of distance that becomes comfortable and then permanent. I almost let that happen. Not because I didn't care. I cared enormously, but because I kept thinking there was more time, and more time, and more time. What more time without acting looked like for me was another winter of going to bed late and lying there in the dark listening to my wife breathe and feeling like a ghost in my own house. More mornings of looking in the mirror and having nothing to say to the man looking back. That was the actual cost, not a statistic. That. What I shared today, the sunlight, the zinc, the anger I finally let out, and what I found in the description that ties it all together, none of those things works alone. They work because they're all pointing at the same thing, giving the body back what it was supposed to have. One doesn't replace the other. The link to what I'm using is in the description and in the pinned comment. Go there, read it carefully, and make your own decision. Nobody should rush you. The men I've seen come back from where I was, and I've known a few, including Hector, they all had one thing in common. They stopped waiting for permission.